Hello, fellow humans. When I see surveys that vast majorities of people want a different kind of society, one that is more just, more egalitarian and fair, with access to well-being for everyone, not just for a small class, I wonder, why is it not happening? Why don't we see the transformation? Why don't we have a revolution that changes everything for the better? Revolutions are not just about barricading streets, chasing kings out of palaces, or throwing Molotov cocktails. In fact, those kinds of revolutions may be in the minority in history. While many revolutions did contain elements of violence, at the core they wanted changes in how power was structured and wanted just rules for organizing society. When Bernie Sanders talked about a political revolution, he certainly did not have in mind insurrections and violence. So we want fundamental changes. How can we do it? What I hope you take away from this video are three ideas. Number one, people from around the world do want fundamental changes in history. Number two, there are many interpretations of what change is. And number three, change is possible and necessary. Briefly about the issues. There's a lot of literature and data about the problems in the world. You have probably heard about many of these issues. However, many of us do not know and cannot possibly know about all the issues all the time. I have talked about planetary boundaries on this channel, how we as a society have breached 6 of these limits and are now in catastrophic territory. I talked about the Earth Overshoot Day, how we need more than one Earth to sustain our economic system. I talked about severe income and wealth inequality, about how democracy is losing ground. In response to these issues, many humans have formed organizations, collectives, to demand governments to fix the issues. These groups have put forward many theories of change with how they think governments should act and what policies to implement, with what degrees of urgency and what priorities and so on. There's no question people want change. The Global Protest Tracker counts that since 2017, over 400 significant anti-government protests have erupted worldwide. More than 132 countries have experienced significant protests. 23% of significant protests have lasted more than 3 months. 135 significant economic anti-government protests that have occurred since 2017, with 12 events having between 1 million and 2 million participants. This Earthworld Representative Survey of G20 countries found that 74% of people support reform of economic systems away from a singular focus on profit and growth towards a stronger focus on human well-being and the planet. What does this change mean for people? Do people want reforms or revolutions? This question is at least 125 years old, since Rosa Luxemburg wrote this pamphlet in which she argues that reforms within capitalism reinforce existing power structures. She contends that capitalism is economically unsustainable and will eventually collapse. Therefore, a revolution is necessary to transform capitalism into socialism. Let us hear some voices on this reform versus revolution spectrum. At number one, we have Mark Carney, former governor of Bank of England and Bank of Canada. In his book, he advocates for green investment of trillions of dollars that can create stronger growth and better jobs, greater export competitiveness in industry, services and finance, and the prospect of meeting climate goals. The book features the word growth 182 times. What kind of growth? How much? At number 2, we have the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. Number 8 is about decent work and, lo and behold, economic growth. At number 3, we have the IPCC 6th Assessment Report, which mentions degrowth 15 times. This is what degrowth means. At number 4, we have researcher Timotei Parikh, who writes, "We must educate our desire for another economy, liberating the future from the eternal return of productivist economic system, whether capitalist or socialist. We must revolutionize the economy, that is to say, dream of futures radically different from the present." At number 5, we have a manifesto for world revolution from Adbusters, who were behind the launch of the Occupy Wall Street movement. At number 6, we have the Red Deal that proposes a comprehensive, full-scale assault on capitalism using indigenous knowledge and tried and true methods of mass mobilization as its ammunition. In this way, it addresses what are commonly thought as single issues like the protection of sacred sites, which often manifest in specific uprisings or insurrections, as structural in nature, which therefore require a structural response that has the abolition of capitalism via revolution as its central goal. At number 7, we have Greta Thunberg, who said in 2019, "The world is waking up and change is coming, whether you like it or not." On this unorganized spectrum of reform versus revolution, each one of us, me and you watching this little video, have our place. I happen to find myself on the revolution side, and I can argue for its necessity. Others, less familiar with the issues I mentioned earlier, may think if we reform the system, we'll be just fine. We can survive the climate crisis, the war, the famine, the poverty, and so on, and keep the same system. I come back now to a theory that I have been talking about on this channel. Then we will link this theory with our world revolution. The theory is this figurative description of our current economic system. Let's call it the system. I see it as a strong link between 3 concepts: property, power, capital. At the core, the system is kept alive by the growth incentive, or as some call it, the profit incentive. Roughly speaking, I understand property as the set of rules and laws that legitimize, maintain, and enforce the possession over a thing, real or virtual, and also the thing itself that is possessed. Power is the ability to command over property or on behalf of property, and also to influence people to do something regardless if they give consent or not, without having to own them. Capital is anything that is used or can be used to foster the accumulation of wealth within an economic system. Property can sometimes become capital when, for example, a building is used as a factory or housing is used to extract high rent, or proprietary algorithms are used to make profit. If property just sits there and is not used in an economic venture, then it is distinct from capital. Almost all property can become capital under the right circumstances. And in fact, that is what the system is designed to do: make everything on earth potential capital for business. Capital can also become power when humans act in its name to lobby governments to write laws that benefit corporations, to silence the voices of workers, to overthrow unfriendly regimes. And finally, property becomes power when rich individuals use their wealth to maintain and increase their position in society. There's much more to say about the connections between these elements, so I will save it for a future video. Because the system is dynamic, always moving, the 3 elements are kept together by the growth incentive. Grow your corporation or perish. Make a profit or perish. All 3 elements serve this incentive to keep the whole system alive and spinning. When growth suffers, all other elements are affected. Power shrinks, capital is harder to accumulate, property loses value. Remember, the question was, how can we do a world revolution? A world revolution would begin to happen when these links become fractured, one at a time. All of them have to wither away before we can conclude that a revolution was successful. This sounds simple enough, but what does it mean in practice? We know about the issues. We know about people's interpretations of what change means. We know about all the attempts at revolutions. For a world revolution to begin, humans would need to organize in collectives that challenge, attack, and dismantle the links between property, power, and capital. Collectives would need to challenge also the growth imperative at the core and advocate for well-being to become the new incentive. For example, activists in the climate justice movement need to be specific that fossil fuel companies must be nationalized. So their regime of property needs to change. They need to be phased out. So they will stop acting like capital for industry, and the control needs to be democratized. So power over them and what comes after them needs to go to the people, which is what I called economic democracy and energy democracy in an earlier video. Another example, dismantling the link between power and property means in practice disconnecting ownership of shares from the corresponding voting power. 1 million shares will not mean 1 million votes. The new doctrine will be 1 human equals 1 vote, not 1 share equals 1 vote. Shares are abstract legal things. They do not vote. People vote. This is what economic democracy means. Humans become equal in power, independent of their property. When activists, labor unions, collectives disrupt events that promote business as usual, they can ask and should ask specifically that the governance of the institution they are disrupting needs to be democratized from bottom up. So everyone affected by what the institution does in society should have a say in the decisions that are made. Corporate charters like this one should be revoked or completely overhauled. In 1890, the highest court in New York State revoked the charter of the North River Sugar Refining Corporation with these words: "The judgment sought against the defendant is one of corporate death. The state which created asks us to destroy, and the penalty invoked represents the extreme rigor of the law. The life of a corporation is, indeed, less than that of the humblest citizen." There are already many humans organized in different kinds of collectives that are active in this struggle. The Global Atlas of Environmental Justice has 3,980 cases that have been reported so far related to climate justice. There are many other struggles. Can they be considered collectively as elements of a world revolution? We can only be certain when enough links between property, power, and capital have been dissolved. For example, if half of all corporations on the S&P 500 list become worker cooperatives and become effective democratic organizations, they will no longer follow the triad model and they will no longer be considered capitalist. That's one way to measure the success of the revolution. The next point I will make in this video is about critical mass. Erica Chenoweth's research shows that it takes about 3.5% of the population to be engaged in an active protest or revolt to trigger significant political changes. This research had its critics, and on several occasions the 3.5% rule has been broken. One example is Brunei in 1962, 4% mobilized, and Bahrain in 2011-2014, 6% mobilized. Both of these cases involved short-lived mobilization against a monarch with heavy foreign support in a country with a very small population. These are just 2 cases out of the approximately 350 studied, of which 150 were considered successful. Critical mass is not just about how many people show up at a revolt or at the disruption of an event indoors that promotes business as usual. It's also about what people show up for, the reasons. Critical mass needs a very strong story, simple enough that can inspire people to come together for very similar reasons. Even if the story is good enough so that millions come to the streets as during the Arab Spring, success is not guaranteed. In the case of the Arab Spring, if the critical mass had been at 15% or 20% of the population, maybe, just maybe, Egypt would not have replaced a dictatorship with another one. Revolutions in rich countries of the global north will always be different than those in the global south. The kind of world revolution we need today can start anywhere and will have to transform societies in very different ways. The global north would phase out its economic habits, decrease its ecological footprint, while the Global South would phase in solid democracies and increase its quality of life. What all these transformations have in common is that they operate more or less under the same economic system. We find capital, power, property linked in various shapes and forms in all countries, including those that do not declare themselves capitalist. If you are ready to join the world revolution, have in mind who has the power, who owns the property, and what is the capital that needs to be challenged. Have a top-of-the-mountain view over the entire system. Act with precision locally, while having in mind how to hit the system where it matters so those links are phased out. Disruptions can be very effective because they can be amplified via social media very fast. It only takes a smartphone to record the interruption of a speech by some fossil fuel CEO or some banking executive that have blood indirectly on their hands. Millions can watch these disruptions and repeat them. Blockades and disruptions are effective in different ways. Their aim should be a transformation of narratives away from the elite and back into the hands of the people. The elite has been pushed their stories for far too long. The entire system serves their stories, not those of the people. Stories that are talked about in culture and in media should be our stories. The takeaway of this video is this: a world revolution is possible if actions, both small and big, aim to break the links between power, capital, and property and replace the growth incentive with the well-being incentive. This means different things in different locations, but the bottom line for all locations must be to bring all humans back into planetary boundaries. The equation for human happiness is actually quite simple. It's what you have divided by what you want. So there are two ways to get happier: increase the numerator or decrease the denominator. The first way, acquiring more haves, gives you a sugary buzz that quickly fades. The second way is the real jam. We can become happy permanently and securely by wanting less. And because you made it to the end of the video, I have some surprise bonus material for you. I am in the early stages of working on an idea for a crowdsourced global policy cloud that could be used to catalyze the world revolution. You can get involved and help. See the links below. Add your comments and suggestions. I will probably make a video about it once it has taken a more solid shape and has seen the eyes of more humans. Thank you for watching. If you can, please support me through the links below to cover the costs of these videos. Future videos will likely not be possible without your support. I will never collect money from advertising. Until next time, be well and increase the peace. And it's a ticket talking Mazda for the biggest. That's a comma and a comma and a comma. Gotta keep